When a ruthless HOA president tried to teach a lesson by listing a man's home online, she never imagined he was a real estate lawyer ready to fight back. Imagine waking up on a Saturday morning, pouring yourself a cup of coffee, opening your laptop, and seeing your own house listed for sale online. Not by you, not by your family, but by someone else. That's the exact nightmare that hit Adrian Layton, a 43-year-old homeowner in Plano, Texas. He wasn't a man easily rattled. Years of working in real estate law had given him a steady head. But this was different. His eyes narrowed at the screen, disbelief turning to heat in his chest. The photos were unmistakable. His white brick two-story home with the trimmed hedges and a basketball hoop by the garage was splashed across Facebook Marketplace under the headline, "For sale by owner, motivated seller." The listing wasn't vague either. It had his exact address, clear shots of his backyard, even a photo that looked like it was taken through the fence line, close enough to make his stomach turn. "Are you kidding me?" he muttered, leaning forward. Adrian clicked through the pictures, his pulse quickening. Whoever posted them hadn't just pulled old photos from Zillow. These were recent, maybe within the past few weeks. His new patio furniture was in plain sight. He immediately thought of his wife, Cheryl, who was upstairs getting ready to meet her sister. If she saw this, she would panic. He decided to hold off telling her until he understood what he was looking at, but the shock was so heavy he had to say something out loud, even to himself. "This is my house. Somebody is trying to sell my damn house." He scrolled down the listing. The supposed seller hadn't even bothered to hide behind anonymity. The contact email led to a profile under the name Colleen Ashford. The air seemed to leave the room. He knew that name. Everyone in the subdivision did. Colleen was the HOA president, a woman who made it her mission to enforce every rule to the letter, and sometimes beyond. Adrian had dealt with her nitpicking for years. Letters about his grass length, notes about where his guests parked, even a warning when his nephew left a basketball hoop at the curb for 2 days. But this was something else entirely. Adrian leaned back, staring at the ceiling. A bitter laugh escaped. "You've got to be out of your mind, Colleen." He picked up his phone and dialed his neighbor, Luis Romero, who lived 2 houses down. "Luis," Adrian said quickly, "I need you to do me a favor. Go on Facebook Marketplace right now and search my address." There was a pause on the line as Luis typed, then a sharp intake of breath. "What the hell?" "Adrian, it says your place is for sale." "Exactly." "That's not me. Somebody put it up." Luis swore under his breath. "And you already know who." "Yeah," Adrian said. "She didn't even hide it." Luis's tone hardened. "That woman has gone too far. I told you she watches your house more than she watches her own." Adrian rubbed his temples. "I need to keep calm. First thing is to document everything. Screenshots, timestamps. I'll get it all." But as much as he tried to stay composed, there was an edge in his voice. The idea that a neighbor, someone with authority over the community, would put his home online as if it were hers to sell wasn't just harassment. It was personal. It was invasive. Upstairs, he heard Cheryl's footsteps coming down. He quickly closed his laptop, but she caught the look on his face. "What's wrong?" she asked, her hand brushing his shoulder. Adrian hesitated. "You're not going to believe this. Sit down for a second." She did. He opened the laptop again and showed her. Her eyes widened. "Oh my God. Adrian, that's our house. She can't do that." "She did," Adrian said quietly. "But she picked the wrong guy to mess with." For the first time in years, Adrian felt something stir that went beyond frustration. It was resolve. He wasn't just a homeowner blindsided by HOA harassment. He was a lawyer who knew the law inside and out. And Colleen had just crossed a line she couldn't walk back. But Adrian had no idea that exposing her scheme would split the entire neighborhood in half, forcing friends to take sides and turning a quiet subdivision into a battleground. The name Colleen Ashford carried weight in the subdivision, though not in the way people usually respect community leaders. She had lived in Plano for nearly 20 years, and somewhere along the way she turned into the self-appointed guardian of property values. At neighborhood meetings, she spoke like the rules of the HOA were scripture and she was the sole interpreter. If a lawn was slightly too long, she sent a letter. If a trash bin lingered at the curb after pickup day, she sent another. She was the type who carried a clipboard to barbecues and scolded children for riding scooters too fast on the sidewalk. Some saw her as dedicated, but many whispered that she was power-hungry, targeting certain residents more than others. Adrian had been one of her favorites to single out. It started small, a letter about his hedges being uneven, then a notice about his nephew's truck parked in the driveway for 3 nights in a row. Over time, the pettiness escalated. Adrian once found her taking photos of his yard at dawn, claiming she was documenting. Cheryl had begged him to let it go, reminding him they moved here for peace and stability. But Colleen didn't let things go. Now, staring at her name listed as the contact on the fraudulent home sale, Adrian realized she wasn't just harassing him anymore. She had crossed into dangerous territory. Later that afternoon, Adrian walked down to the small park at the center of the subdivision, where a handful of neighbors were chatting near the picnic tables. Louise was already there, along with Denise Harper, who lived across from Colleen, and Tom Delgado, a retiree known for keeping his opinions to himself. Louise spotted Adrian and waved him over. "Tell them what you told me." Adrian pulled up the listing on his phone and passed it to Denise. Her eyes widened. "Oh, Lord. That's your house. And it's under Colleen's name? She really put this up?" "She did," Adrian said, steady but firm. "I don't know if she thinks it's funny or if she's trying to scare me, but it's illegal either way." Tom whistled softly. "That woman's been out of control for years. Last month she told my grandson he couldn't chalk the sidewalk, said it made the community look messy." "Chalk, for crying out loud." Denise shook her head. "I've lived next to her for 15 years. She doesn't let go of grudges. You remember when the Taylors painted their shutters navy blue? She sent 3 violation notices until they changed them back. And Adrian, I hate to say it, but I think she's had her eyes on you for a long time. She acts like you don't belong here." The comment hung in the air. Adrian knew what she meant but didn't want to say it out loud. Instead, he kept his voice even. "What matters is the law. And right now, the law is on my side. What she's done, posting my house for sale without permission, that's fraud. That's harassment. That's grounds for legal action." Louise leaned in. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to start by giving her a chance to explain herself. But she's not going to like how this ends." That evening, Adrian walked to Colleen's house. It was just 2 streets over, a perfectly manicured property with flower beds arranged like they were auditioning for a magazine spread. He knocked firmly on the door. When she answered, she looked almost pleased to see him. "Adrian," she said in her clipped, formal tone, "I was wondering when you'd come by." He held up his phone, the listing open on the screen. "This. You put my house up for sale." Her smile didn't falter. "I did. And maybe now you'll take the HOA guidelines seriously. Parking trucks in the driveway, leaving basketball hoops out, grass an inch too high. It all drags down our community. If you won't listen to notices, maybe this will get your attention." Adrian stared at her, incredulous. "You think pretending to sell my house is enforcement? You've committed fraud, Colleen. Do you realize the seriousness of what you've done?" She crossed her arms. "Don't lecture me. I'm protecting the neighborhood. People like you don't understand how quickly things can fall apart if someone doesn't take charge." "People like me?" Adrian repeated slowly. Colleen didn't blink. "You don't respect the rules." "That's all I meant." Adrian's voice sharpened. "No, that's not all you meant. But here's the difference. You think you're untouchable because you run this HOA. I'm not just a homeowner. I'm a real estate attorney. I know exactly how wrong this is, and I know exactly how to handle it." For the first time, her face faltered. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her eyes before she regained her composure. "Do what you have to do," she said coolly, and closed the door. Adrian walked away with his jaw tight, his mind racing. This wasn't just a neighborly spat anymore. Colleen had turned it into a war, and he was ready for it. But what Adrian didn't know was that the subdivision itself was about to become the battleground, with neighbors forced to choose sides in a conflict that reached far beyond lawn care and parking violations. By Sunday morning, the subdivision was buzzing with whispers. Adrian hadn't told everyone, but the listing had been online long enough for word to spread. Neighbors scrolled on their phones during breakfast, murmuring about how Adrian's house was suddenly for sale. Some thought it was a mistake. Others knew exactly whose name was behind the post. Adrian decided to confront Colleen more directly. The brief exchange at her front door wasn't enough. He wanted it on record. If she thought this was a game, he'd show her how serious it was. He grabbed his phone and called Louise. "I'm going back to her place," he said. "Come with me. I want a witness." Louise didn't hesitate. "I'll be there in 5 minutes." When they walked up to Colleen's house again, the sun was just climbing, the street still quiet except for a few joggers. Adrian pressed the doorbell firmly, holding his phone ready to record. Colleen answered, this time with her reading glasses perched low on her nose. She looked from Adrian to Louise, then smirked. "Bringing back up now?" Adrian kept his tone level. "Colleen, I want you to explain yourself. On camera. Why did you post my house online as if it were for sale?" Her eyes flickered at the phone, but she didn't back down. "Because you've ignored too many notices. I've told you repeatedly that trucks aren't allowed in the driveway overnight. I've told you that basketball hoops can't stay out. You refuse to comply, so I made a point. People in this neighborhood need to know their homes are at risk if others drag down values." Luis interjected, his voice sharp. "That's not a point." "That's fraud, Colleen. You're playing with someone's property, their safety, their reputation," Colleen scoffed. "Safety? Please, no one was going to actually buy it." It was symbolic. Adrian lowered the phone slightly, his voice cutting through. "Symbolic? You listed my legal address with photos of my property. That's not symbolic. That's a false advertisement. That's misrepresentation. And depending on intent, it could be considered attempted fraud. I could file both civil and criminal complaints." For the first time, her confident veneer cracked. "You wouldn't dare," she said, but her voice lacked its usual force. "Watch me," Adrian replied. "You crossed the line, Colleen. You've been harassing me for years, and I let it slide because I didn't want to stir things up. But this, you've made it impossible to ignore, and you did it so brazenly you didn't even bother to hide your name. You've essentially confessed in public." Luis folded his arms. "And let's be clear, everyone in this neighborhood already knows. Word's out. You're not protecting property values. You're embarrassing the community." Colleen's cheeks flushed red. She straightened, clinging to her usual authority. "You think you scare me because you're a lawyer? I've dealt with plenty of people who talk big. You'll see. The board supports me." Adrian leaned in slightly, his eyes steady. "Do they? Or do they just put up with you because no one wants to challenge you? I'm done letting you push me around. You've harassed me, you've humiliated me, and now you've jeopardized my family's sense of safety in our own home. I don't care how much sway you think you have with this HOA. You're going to answer for this." The silence after his words was heavy. Even Colleen seemed at a loss. Finally, she snapped. "You're not the victim here, Adrian. You've always been the problem." He exhaled through his nose, calm but resolute. "That's where you're wrong. I've always been the neighbor willing to mind my own business. You're the one who turned this into a personal crusade. And now, you're going to regret it." With that, he ended the recording, slipped his phone back into his pocket, and turned to leave. Luis followed, but not before giving Colleen a pointed look. Back at Adrian's house, Cheryl was waiting on the porch. She had heard raised voices from down the street. "What happened?" she asked. Adrian sat beside her and explained, replaying part of the recording. Cheryl shook her head in disbelief. She really admitted it. "On camera. Adrian, this is huge." He nodded. "It is, and it's just the beginning. I'm going to start putting everything together. Screenshots of the listing, that video, every letter she's sent me. I'll build the case piece by piece." Cheryl placed her hand on his. "Just promise me one thing. Promise me you'll keep this about the law, not anger. Don't let her drag you down to her level." Adrian met her eyes. "That's the only way to win." But what neither of them knew was that Colleen wasn't about to back off quietly. She was preparing her own defense, and she would make sure the neighborhood was caught right in the middle. By Monday morning, Adrian was already in full lawyer mode. He sat at his dining room table with his laptop open, papers spread across the surface, and a yellow legal pad filled with notes. Each detail mattered. Every screenshot, every notice Colleen had left in his mailbox, every conversation with neighbors, all of it could become evidence. He clicked through the photos of the fraudulent listing again, saving them with timestamps. The comments under the post had started to pile up before it was taken down. Some were jokes. Nice house? How much? But others were more troubling. Strangers asking about tours, someone tagging a friend who was house hunting. It sent a chill through him. Someone could have shown up at his doorstep believing the home was available. That thought made his skin crawl. Cheryl walked in with a fresh cup of coffee. "You've been at this for hours." "You need a break." Adrian shook his head. "No time for breaks." "If I let anything slip, she'll claim I'm exaggerating." She sat across from him. "You're right. But don't forget to live in this house while you're protecting it." Her words softened him for a moment, but then his phone buzzed. It was Luis. "Adrian, you need to know something," Luis said, his tone urgent. "I was at the corner store this morning, and I overheard Colleen talking to Mark Donnelly. She's telling people you're dangerous, that you threatened her on her porch." Adrian closed his eyes, inhaling slowly. "Of course she is. She's twisting it already. She's trying to rally people to her side," Luis warned, and Mark looked like he was buying it. Adrian thanked him and hung up, his jaw tightening. He expected pushback, but the speed at which Colleen moved to control the story still caught him off guard. That evening, the subdivision felt different. People Adrian usually waved to gave stiff nods or avoided eye contact altogether. On the corner, he noticed Joanne Fisher, a board member, whispering with Colleen in the glow of a porch light. They glanced his way, then turned back quickly. Later, as Adrian took out the trash, Denise crossed the street to him. "I don't like what she's saying about you," she whispered. "She told me you stormed her porch, waving your phone like a weapon. That's not what I saw when you and Luis went over." Adrian gave a humorless chuckle. "She's rewriting history already." Denise lowered her voice. "Be careful. People here don't like conflict. They'll believe whatever story makes them feel safe, even if it's not true." The weight of her words lingered long after she walked back to her house. The next day, a notice appeared in Adrian's mailbox. It wasn't an official letter from the HOA, it was a typed statement signed only with "the board." It accused him of aggressive behavior toward Colleen and warned that repeated actions could result in fines or even legal referral. Adrian read it twice, then tossed it on the table in disgust. "She's manufacturing a paper trail against me." Cheryl picked it up. "This isn't even on letterhead." No signatures. Just intimidation. "Exactly," Adrian said. "And intimidation is often more effective than truth." That night, Adrian called a few neighbors he trusted. Louise came over with his wife, and Denise joined them too. They sat around Adrian's living room, the mood heavy. "This is turning into a witch hunt," Denise said. "She's been calling people, telling them you're combative. I've lived across from her long enough to know she loves control. But this is about destroying you." Luis leaned forward. "You can't just fight this in whispers. You need to show everyone what she did. The listing, the video, everything. Let people see the truth." Adrian nodded slowly. "I'll get there, but I want to do it right. If this goes to court, and it will, I want her lies on record. Every single one," Cheryl added softly. "We also need to protect our peace. This is our home. Don't let her poison it." Adrian looked around the room at his friends and allies. He could feel the storm brewing, and he knew it was going to get worse before it got better. He stood, collecting the papers on the table into a neat stack. "She thinks she can scare me into silence. But she's forgetting one thing. I make a living untangling lies in courtrooms. She doesn't get to write this story." But while Adrian was preparing to fight with facts, Colleen was doubling down with rumors, and soon the entire subdivision would be forced to choose sides in a conflict that felt less like neighborhood drama and more like open war. By midweek, The subdivision no longer felt like the calm community Adrian had moved into years ago. A line had been drawn, though no one admitted it openly. You could tell by who waved and who didn't, who lingered to chat on the sidewalk, and who quickly crossed the street. Conversations that used to be about football scores or gardening tips now had a sharper edge. Everyone seemed to be weighing loyalty against silence. On Wednesday evening, the HOA board announced a special meeting at the community center on Spring Creek Parkway. The notice went out by email, claiming the meeting would address concerns over recent conflicts between a homeowner and the board. Adrian knew exactly who they meant. When he arrived that night, the parking lot was already packed. Cheryl came with him, her arm looped through his as they walked toward the glass doors. Inside, the low murmur of voices rose and fell like a tide. Neighbors clustered in small groups, some glancing at Adrian with wary curiosity, others greeting him with nods of encouragement. At the front of the room sat Colleen, flanked by two board members, Joanne Fisher, who rarely disagreed with her, and Richard Meeks, a middle-aged accountant who preferred order over confrontation. Colleen's clipboard rested on the table, a symbol of her authority as much as a tool. The meeting started with Richard clearing his throat. "We're here tonight to discuss issues affecting our community. Let's keep comments respectful." Colleen wasted no time. "Thank you, Richard. As HOA president, I feel it's my duty to address behavior that threatens our neighborhood's stability. Recently, a homeowner, Mr. Adrian Layton, has chosen to disregard community standards repeatedly. When I attempted to address it, he responded with hostility, even recording me without consent." A ripple moved through the room. Adrian stood immediately, his voice steady. "If you're going to bring up recordings, let's be accurate. I recorded you admitting that you fraudulently listed my home for sale online. I have proof, and I can share it right now if needed." Gasps filled the room. Colleen's eyes narrowed, but she forced a smile. That listing was symbolic. It was never meant to mislead. Adrian held up his phone. Symbolic? It had my full address, my backyard, strangers commenting, asking if they could see the house. That isn't symbolism. That's exposure. My family could have been put at risk. From the back of the room, Denise raised her voice. "He's telling the truth. I saw it before it was taken down. It wasn't a joke," Luis chimed in. "And I was with him when he confronted you. You admitted it. No one forced you to say those words." Colleen's jaw tightened. "These two are his friends. Of course they'll back him." For a moment, silence gripped the room. Then Tom Delgado, the usually quiet retiree, spoke up. "I've lived here 15 years. I've watched you write up families for leaving toys on the lawn, Colleen. You push people around. But this is too far." A few neighbors nodded in agreement, but others shifted uncomfortably. Mark Donnelly, who Colleen had spoken to at the store, stood. "With all due respect, Adrian hasn't exactly followed the rules either. Trucks in the driveway, basketball hoops out. Colleen isn't lying about that. Rules exist for a reason. If we let one person ignore them, property values fall." Adrian turned to him, controlled but direct. "Mark, rules are one thing. Fraud is another. Even if I had 1,000 basketball hoops in my driveway, it wouldn't justify listing my home online without my consent. This isn't about grass length. It's about abuse of power." The room buzzed with divided voice. Some muttered agreement with Adrian, others whispered support for Colleen. The tension was thick, the kind that made neighbors glance at each other differently, wondering who was on which side. Richard finally banged the table lightly. "All right, enough. This meeting isn't going to be a courtroom." Adrian raised his hand. "You're right, Richard. It won't be. The courtroom is where this is heading. Because I'm filing suit." Tonight, a hush fell over the room. Cheryl reached for his arm, steadying him. Colleen's smile faded completely. Her eyes were cold, her voice sharp. "You think you'll win? I run this HOA. You're going to regret this, Adrian." He met her glare without flinching. "No, Colleen. The only one who's going to regret this is you." The meeting ended in chaos, neighbors spilling into the parking lot, whispering furiously. The subdivision had officially fractured. By the time Adrian drove home, he could feel the weight of it pressing against his windows, the sense that his quiet street had turned into a war zone, with everyone watching, waiting to see who would come out on top. But Colleen wasn't done fighting, and as Adrian prepared his case, she was already plotting her next move, a campaign of whispers and intimidation meant to turn even more neighbors against him. The morning after the explosive HOA meeting, Adrian sat in his home office surrounded by files. The blinds were drawn, his desk covered in neatly stacked papers, each pile labeled with sticky notes. Notices, screenshots, witnesses, correspondence. Years of practicing law had conditioned him to work methodically. This wasn't just personal anymore. This was a case, and he was going to treat it like one. Cheryl peeked in, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You've been at it since dawn," she said softly. "At least drink this before it gets cold." He accepted the cup, sighing. "Thank you. I can't afford to miss a single detail. She's already twisting the narrative, calling me hostile. If I don't build this airtight, she'll convince people I'm the aggressor." Cheryl set her hand on his shoulder. "You've been fighting battles in courtrooms for years, Adrian. You know exactly how to do this. Just don't forget this isn't only about evidence, it's about us being able to breathe in our own home." He nodded, touched, but determined. "I promise you, Cheryl, I'll make sure she never pulls something like this again. Not with us. Not with anyone." That afternoon, he called Denise and Luis over. When they arrived, he spread everything across the dining table like a general laying out a battle map. "All right," Adrian began. "I've got the screenshots of the listing. It was up for 36 hours before she took it down. The timestamps are here, and I've got comments archived. I've also got video evidence of her admitting she posted it." "That alone is damning." Luis leaned in. "She really said it herself. That's powerful." "Exactly," Adrian continued. "But she's trying to frame me as hostile. That's why I need witness testimony. Denise, you saw the listing before it disappeared, right?" "I did," she confirmed. "And I'll swear to that in writing. It wasn't a prank, Adrian. It was your house." Plain as day, Adrian jotted notes quickly. "Good. Luis, you were with me when I confronted her. You heard everything she said?" Luis nodded firmly. "Every word. I'll back you up in court." "Perfect. Between that and the letters she's sent me over the years, we've got a clear pattern of harassment escalating to fraud. Any decent judge will see this." Cheryl added. "What about neighbors on her side? People like Mark?" Adrian exhaled. "They'll speak against me, no doubt. But this isn't a popularity contest. It's law. And in law, evidence outweighs gossip." The conversation paused as Denise looked around the table. "You know what worries me? This neighborhood. People don't like conflict. They'll back whoever makes the most noise. And right now, that's Colleen." Adrian leaned back, considering her words. "Then I'll make sure the truth is louder. Once this is filed, she can't spin it as petty drama. It'll be public record." That night, Adrian stayed up drafting the complaint. The legal jargon came easily. Fraudulent misrepresentation, defamation, harassment. He laid out the timeline, repeated petty complaints, escalating to a fraudulent online listing, capped with attempts to smear his reputation. As he typed, he felt the same rhythm he'd felt in countless cases before, but this time it carried a sharper edge. This wasn't a client he was fighting for. It was himself. Around midnight, Cheryl stepped into the office. "Come to bed," she urged. Adrian rubbed his eyes. "Almost done. Just one more section." She leaned against the doorframe. "You know, part of me is glad you're a lawyer. Anyone else in your shoes would be helpless. But the other part of me wishes you didn't have to be one right now. I just want to live in our home without feeling like we're in a courtroom every day." Her words cut through him, heavier than he expected. He looked up and managed a tired smile. "I know. And when this is over, that's exactly what we'll have." The next morning, he filed the complaint at the Collin County Courthouse. As he walked through the glass doors, briefcase in hand, he felt a strange calm. The fight had officially shifted from sidewalks and gossip to a place he knew well, the courtroom. But Adrian had no idea how far Colleen was willing to go to defend herself. And soon, the neighborhood battle would spiral into something even uglier, testing just how strong his evidence and his resolve really were. The lawsuit filing hit the neighborhood like a thunderclap. By the end of the week, everyone seemed to know that Adrian had taken Colleen to court. For some, it was a relief. They'd long wanted someone to challenge her iron grip. For others, it was terrifying. A courtroom battle meant drama spilling beyond HOA notices, and most people just wanted to keep their heads down. Colleen, however, wasted no time spinning her version of events. She walked door to door with a stack of typed letters, handing them out like campaign flyers. In them, she painted Adrian as a troublemaker who bullied her and endangered the harmony of the community. At one house, she stood on the porch speaking to Mark Donnelly. "Mark, you know me," she said in her firm, clipped voice. "I've kept this neighborhood in order for years. Adrian is trying to tear it apart with lawsuits and hostility. He even recorded me without my consent. Who knows what he'll do next?" Mark frowned, clearly uncomfortable. "But Colleen, you did put his house online, right?" She waved her hand dismissively. "It was symbolic, Mark." "He's exaggerating, twisting it. I did what I had to do to make a point. That's what leadership requires." Meanwhile, Adrian was feeling the weight of her counterattacks. On Friday night, as he pulled into his driveway, a police cruiser slowed to a stop in front of his house. 2 officers stepped out. "Mr. Layton?" one of them asked. Adrian's pulse quickened. "Yes, that's me." "We received a call about a disturbance here earlier this evening." Neighbors reported raised voices, possibly aggressive behavior. Adrian blinked, stunned. "There hasn't been a disturbance here. My wife and I just got back from dinner." Cheryl stepped out of the car, holding onto his arm. "We've been gone for hours." "Who called?" The officers exchanged glances. "We can't disclose that, Ma'am. But if everything's fine, we'll make a note." Adrian knew immediately who was behind it. As the cruiser pulled away, Cheryl looked at him with worry. "She's not just fighting you in court. She's trying to paint you as unstable." He exhaled slowly, forcing calm into his voice. "Then we document this too. Every false report, every accusation, it all goes into the file." But inside, his stomach churned. Colleen wasn't afraid to drag law enforcement into her web. If he hadn't been a lawyer, that visit could have gone very differently. The tension spilled over into the weekend. On Saturday morning, the HOA held a small event at the community park, a potluck picnic. Normally it was a cheerful affair, kids running around, neighbors swapping recipes. This time, the air was charged. Adrian and Cheryl attended, determined not to hide. As they walked up, he heard whispers ripple through the clusters of families. Some offered supportive smiles, others turned away. Near the dessert table, Colleen stood with a group of supporters, her voice carrying across the lawn. "This is what happens when people think they're above the rules. Lawsuits, police, disruption. Is that what any of us want for our community?" Adrian clenched his jaw but walked straight toward her. "If you're going to talk about me, Colleen, at least have the decency to say it to my face." The group around her went quiet. Colleen's lips curled in a tight smile. "I don't need to justify myself to you, Adrian. The community knows who I am. They know what I stand for. And they know what you did." Adrian shot back. "They know you listed my house online like it was your property. They know you called the police to fabricate a disturbance. This isn't leadership, Colleen. It's harassment." The silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable. Then Denise, who had been sitting nearby, stood and spoke clearly. "He's right. I saw the listing myself, and I've lived here long enough to see how far you've pushed people. Enough is enough." A few neighbors murmured agreement, while others looked down, unwilling to take a side. Colleen's eyes narrowed. "This isn't over, Adrian. You think you're so clever because you're a lawyer. But this neighborhood doesn't run on legal briefs, it runs on trust. And you've lost it." Adrian held her gaze. "No, Colleen, you've lost it. And soon a judge will make that official." He turned and walked away with Cheryl at his side, leaving the park buzzing with tension. Some clapped softly, others shook their heads. The divide was widening, and everyone could feel it. That night, Adrian sat on the porch, staring out at the quiet street. Louise came by with a beer in hand and sat beside him. "You handled yourself well today," Louise said. "But you know she's not done. She'll fight you tooth and nail." Adrian nodded. "Let her. The stronger she fights, the clearer her true nature becomes. And the more evidence I'll have. But Colleen wasn't just preparing for a courtroom fight. She was digging in, ready to weaponize every ounce of influence she had left, and the neighborhood was bracing for an explosion. By the time Adrian's case landed on the docket at the Collin County Courthouse, the subdivision felt like it had split into two separate worlds. On one side were neighbors who quietly cheered him on, tired of years of Colleen's petty control. On the other were those who, either out of fear or loyalty, clung to her vision of order. For Adrian, the whispers and cold stares no longer mattered. Everything now hinged on what would happen inside a courtroom. The morning of the hearing, Adrian dressed carefully. Dark suit, polished shoes, steady hands. Cheryl straightened his tie before they left, her touch lingering longer than usual. "You've got this," she whispered. He kissed her forehead, drawing strength from her calm. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was tense. Neighbors filled the benches, some curious, some loyal, some hoping this would all just end. At the front, Colleen sat with her attorney, Douglas Pratt, a sharp-tongued lawyer with a reputation for aggression. She held her clipboard even here, tapping it against the table like a nervous tick. The judge, Honorable Judge Mason Carrington, entered, his robe flowing as he settled behind the bench. His voice was firm but even. "This court is now in session. Case number 22-3549, Layton versus Ashford. Counsel, are you ready?" Adrian rose. "Yes, Your Honor." Douglas did the same. "Ready for the defense." Adrian began by laying out the foundation. He spoke clearly, without theatrics, presenting screenshots of the online listing, each time stamped. "As you can see, Your Honor, this was not a joke. It was a fraudulent listing using my legal address, recent photos of my property, and language suggesting I was a seller. I did not authorize this in any way." The judge leaned forward, adjusting his glasses as he looked at the evidence. "Mr. Layton, these photos appear to be taken recently. How did they get online?" Adrian turned to Colleen, his voice steady. "Perhaps Miss Ashford would like to explain." She admitted on video that she created the listing. Gasps rippled through the benches as Adrian played the recording from his phone. Colleen's own voice filled the courtroom. "I did. And maybe now you'll take the HOA guidelines seriously." Colleen's attorney sprang up. "Objection, Your Honor!" "That recording was obtained without consent." Judge Carrington raised a hand. "Overruled. Texas is a one-party consent state for recordings. The video stands." Adrian continued. "Your Honor, beyond the listing itself, Ms. Ashford has engaged in a consistent pattern of harassment. Here are notices she sent me, over 30 in the past 2 years, about issues as minor as the angle of my hedges or a guest's car parked overnight. This is not rule enforcement. This is targeted harassment." Douglas stood, adjusting his jacket. "Your Honor, the HOA exists to maintain property values. My client has dedicated her time, unpaid, to keeping this community orderly. Mr. Layton is no victim. He's the one who has consistently ignored rules everyone else abides by. My client's so-called symbolic listing was a protest, admittedly unconventional, but not malicious." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Pratt, are you suggesting that listing someone's home for sale without consent is not malicious?" Douglas cleared his throat. "I'm suggesting intent matters, Your Honor. She never profited, never misled anyone into buying." It was a statement Adrian shot back, his voice firm. "Intent doesn't erase impact." People commented on the listing. Strangers tagged friends looking for houses. Someone could have shown up at my door expecting a tour. My family's safety was compromised. Fraud doesn't require profit. It requires misrepresentation. And that's exactly what happened. From the benches, Denise spoke out suddenly, unable to stay quiet. "He's right." I saw it myself before it was deleted. It wasn't a protest. It was his house, plain and clear. The judge banged his gavel lightly. "Order. Witnesses will be heard at the proper time." Adrian then presented the notice that had mysteriously appeared in his mailbox after the confrontation. "This unsigned letter, Your Honor, accused me of aggression toward Ms. Ashford." It was intimidation. I have no doubt it came from her, or at the very least her direction. Douglas rose again. "Objection. Speculation withdrawn," Adrian said smoothly. "But I'd point out that no board member signed it, no official letterhead. It was designed to smear me without accountability. The judge looked from Adrian to Colleen. Ms. Ashford, did you or did you not create this listing? Colleen shifted in her seat, her face tight. Yes, but it was— That's all I need for now, the judge cut her off. The fact alone is damning. We'll proceed with closing arguments. Douglas delivered his with sharp rhetoric, painting Adrian as a chronic complainer who used his legal background to intimidate. But Adrian's closing was calm, measured. Your Honor, this isn't about grass height or basketball hoops. It's about trust. When we buy a home, we believe it's ours to protect and cherish. Ms. Ashford violated that trust by publicly listing my property without my consent. If this court allows her actions to stand as merely symbolic, it sends a message that harassment is acceptable if dressed up as leadership. That cannot be the precedent. The judge nodded slowly, eyes heavy with thought. I'll deliver my ruling shortly. Court is adjourned until then. As the gavel struck, neighbors filed out in silence, the tension almost unbearable. Adrian sat down, exhaling at last. The evidence was strong, but he knew courts could be unpredictable. But the real question wasn't just what the judge would decide. It was how the neighborhood would react once the verdict came down, and whether the fractures between friends and neighbors could ever truly be repaired. The day of the verdict arrived with a nervous weight that seemed to hang over the entire subdivision. For Adrian, it felt like walking into the courthouse would decide not just his case, but whether his family could ever feel secure in their home again. He had been through hundreds of hearings as a lawyer, but this one was different. This wasn't about a client. It was his life, his street, his name. When Judge Carrington entered the courtroom, the room hushed. Neighbors filled the benches again, their faces tight with anticipation. Some looked hopeful, others tense, and a few avoided eye contact entirely. Colleen sat at the defense table with Douglas, clutching her clipboard like a shield, her lips pressed into a thin line. The judge adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and began. After reviewing the evidence presented in this matter, Layton versus Ashford, the court finds the following. Adrian's chest tightened. Cheryl's hand slipped into his, her grip firm, steady. First, the judge continued, Ms. Ashford admits to creating and publishing an online listing for the plaintiff's home without his consent. The court finds this action constitutes fraudulent misrepresentation. Regardless of her stated intent, the result exposed Mr. Layton's family to potential harm and confusion, and such behavior cannot be excused as symbolic. A murmur spread through the benches. Colleen's face flushed, but she sat rigid, refusing to look at anyone. Second, the judge said, the court notes a documented pattern of targeted enforcement actions against Mr. Layton by Ms. Ashford. While HOA rules exist for community standards, they must be applied fairly and without bias. The evidence demonstrates selective targeting, escalating to harassment. Denise let out a quiet, audible, yes, her relief palpable. Louise leaned forward, nodding at Adrian with pride. Therefore, Judge Carrington concluded, this court rules in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Adrian Layton. Ms. Ashford is hereby ordered to cease all direct contact with the plaintiff and his family. She is further ordered to resign her position as HOA president, effective immediately. In addition, statutory damages in the amount of $25,000 are awarded to the plaintiff for harassment, reputational harm, and emotional distress. The gavel struck once, firm and final. Court is adjourned. The room erupted, not with cheers, but with a flood of voices. Some clapped, others whispered angrily. Adrian remained seated for a moment, absorbing the words. Victory felt less like triumph and more like release. He turned to Cheryl, who kissed his cheek, tears in her eyes. You did it, she whispered. Colleen, however, shot to her feet. This is ridiculous, she snapped, her voice cracking. I've dedicated years to keeping this community in order, and this is how I'm repaid? By being humiliated? Douglas tugged at her sleeve, murmuring for her to calm down, but she yanked away. No, they need me. Without me, this place will fall apart. Judge Carrington banged his gavel again, voice sharp. Miss Ashford, you will respect this court or be held in contempt. Her words faltered into angry muttering as she sank back into her chair, defeated but defiant. Outside the courthouse, reporters and onlookers gathered, drawn by the unusual story of a homeowner suing an HOA president for such a bizarre violation. Cameras clicked, microphones extended. Adrian held up his hand. I'm not here for spectacle, he said firmly. This case was about accountability. Homeownership is about trust. My family deserved to feel safe in our home, and today the court affirmed that. This wasn't just a win for me. It's a reminder that no one, not even an HOA president, is above the law. His words echoed with sincerity, not performance. Neighbors who had been silent before approached to shake his hand. Tom Delgado offered a rare smile. You gave us all a little courage today, he said. But not everyone shared that sentiment. Mark Donnelly, arms folded, muttered to another resident, this will just make the HOA weaker. Watch property values drop now. Adrian heard him, but chose not to respond. Some people would never be convinced. What mattered was that Colleen's reign of intimidation had ended. That evening, back in the subdivision, the atmosphere was charged. Some houses displayed quiet celebration, neighbors dropping by with food, offering congratulations. Others remained shuttered, blinds closed, avoiding the subject. As Adrian and Cheryl sat on their porch with Luis and Denise, the sun setting behind the rows of houses, the air finally felt lighter. You changed things, Adrian, Denise said softly. People know now they don't have to just put up with her. He took a slow sip of his drink, the weight of the long fight finally lifting. I didn't want to be the one to lead this battle. But when someone tries to take your home, your sanctuary, you don't have a choice. You fight. But even as the neighborhood breathed in the aftermath of the verdict, the question lingered. Could fractured trust ever be repaired, or had the scars of this conflict left permanent cracks in the community? In the weeks after the verdict, the subdivision slowly began adjusting to life without Colleen's iron grip. The change wasn't immediate. Years of her control had left habits hard to break. But there was a noticeable difference. The constant fear of receiving another petty notice eased. Children rode their scooters more freely. Neighbors who had avoided each other during the conflict began to exchange small smiles again. Adrian felt the shift most strongly one Saturday morning when he walked outside with his coffee and saw Denise chatting with Tom across the street, while Luis trimmed his hedges, music playing from a small speaker. It was ordinary, but after months of tension, ordinary felt remarkable. Still, not everyone was ready to let go of the divide. At the HOA board election a month later, turnout was higher than it had been in years. People who once stayed silent about neighborhood affairs showed up to cast votes for new leadership. Adrian attended, but he didn't campaign or try to sway anyone. When neighbors asked if he would run, he shook his head. I've had enough of board politics for a lifetime, he said with a smile. I just want to be a good neighbor. The board elected new officers, neighbors who valued fairness over control. Joanne Fisher stepped down quietly. Richard Meeks remained, but promised a more balanced approach. And for the first time in years, meetings ended without shouting or thinly veiled threats. Colleen, however, did not disappear quietly. Though she was forced to resign, she still lived 2 streets away. Some neighbors said she barely left her house anymore. Others claimed they saw her pacing in her yard, muttering under her breath. Adrian occasionally caught her glaring as he drove by, but she never spoke to him again. One evening, Cheryl found him sitting on the porch, staring at the street where kids were playing basketball. She sat beside him. You know, she said, I hated every second of that fight, but I'm proud of you. You stood up when it mattered. Adrian exhaled, nodding slowly. I didn't want to be the one to take it on. But when your home is threatened, you realize something. It's not just about property. It's about dignity. About not letting someone trample over you because they think they can. Cheryl rested her head against his shoulder. And now we can breathe again. A few days later, Denise stopped by with a basket of muffins. She set it on Adrian's table and said, This neighborhood owes you more than muffins. People are finally realizing they don't have to be silent. You gave us a voice. Adrian smiled, though humbly. All I did was what anyone should do. Stand up when someone crosses the line. Louise, who had come with her, added, "Yeah, but most people wouldn't have had the courage. Or the knowledge. You reminded us that rules are supposed to protect, not oppress." That night, Adrian reflected on the entire ordeal. From the moment he'd first seen his house listed online to the verdict in the courtroom, it had been a relentless storm. Fear, anger, shock, tension, all of it had weighed on him. But now, looking back, he saw it clearly. The lesson wasn't just about winning a case or removing a corrupt HOA president. It was about the responsibility of standing firm in the face of injustice, no matter how small it seemed at first. If someone tries to chip away at your rights, your peace, or your dignity, you have to stand your ground. Because silence allows bullies to grow stronger. On Sunday morning, Adrian and Cheryl walked together through the subdivision. Neighbors waved, children played, and for the first time in a long while, the street felt like a community again. Adrian smiled as he thought about the road they'd traveled. It hadn't been easy. It hadn't been quick. But it had been worth it. He turned to Cheryl, his voice calm but firm. In the end, it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about making sure this place, our home, remains ours, and making sure everyone knows they don't have to live under fear. Not here, not anywhere. The story of Adrian Layton versus Colleen Ashford would linger in the subdivision for years, told in whispers at block parties and in cautionary tones at HOA meetings. And with each retelling, the message would stay the same. Abuse of power can last only as long as good people stay silent. So if there's one lesson to carry forward, it's this. Whether in your neighborhood, your workplace, or your community, don't let intimidation become the norm. Stand your ground, know your rights, and defend them. Because at the end of the day, a home isn't just a house. It's your sanctuary. And no one has the right to take that from you. If you found yourself pulled into Adrian's fight, remember to subscribe for more stories like this. Stories that remind us why standing up matters, even when it feels easier to stay quiet.